you want to turn to 1 Kings chapter 17. You know, when you think about Mother's Day, and I want to wish a happy Mother's Day to all of you here today, that it's a very special time when we think back. I just talked with our young people downstairs for the last half hour or so, that we need to be thankful for our mothers, for the memories that we have of our mothers, and being able to understand the great part that they play in our society. And there are a lot of great mothers that we read of in the Bible. For the purpose of my message today, I wanted to look at one that maybe, how many of you have ever heard of the widow of Zarephath? That's what I thought. Interesting lady. I know the story in 1 Kings 17 is basically about Elijah and being prepared to go into his ministry, but we learn a lot about this lady, and as we look at different aspects of this lady's life, that maybe we can spend the time also thinking about our mothers and some of the things they did for us. Came across a story about three sons that were discussing what they did for mom at Mother's Day. They were grown, they lived far apart, and they were just going back and forth what they did for their mother. And the first son, the oldest son, name was Milton. I don't know who in the world would name their child Milton. No. But he said, well, I built mom this huge house. Mom was in her 80s, and I want to have a really nice place to live, so I built her this huge house. Well, the second son was named Gerald. He said, well, I bought mom a new Mercedes with a driver. She can go wherever she wants to go, and it'll just be great for mom to be able to travel. Well, the third son named Donald, he said, well, I beat all of it. He said, you know how much mom loved the Bible, and mom's not able to see. So I had this parrot that I found that had been trained for 12 years, and this parrot could recite the Bible. And not only does the parrot recite the Bible, mom can tell him what verse she wants, and they'll go right to that verse and recite the Bible for her. So they all three got the response from their mom, and the first response said, Milton, the house is too big for me. I'm living in one room, I'm too tired and too old to clean it, so it really wasn't a very good gift. The second son, she said, I don't travel anywhere, so the car and the driver are little value at all. So she said, well, dearest Donald, you're the only son that had good sense. You know what your mother likes. The chicken was delicious. We could all come up with stories about, you know, my mom. I could stand here and talk to you forever about things about my mom and some of the things we remember, and it's just so important that we hold on to this, I believe. I don't know how much you read or you listen outside of what's going on in our world today, but not only are there some very basic values that are under fire here, the family is under fire in a very real way, because there are those that have a different philosophy that believe that if we can do away with the family unit, then they can destroy those moral values. One of the things that I've noticed, you know, our government is trying to do is to start daycare for everyone, preschool for everyone. Do you understand why they want that? They want to get their children away from us before we can teach them moral values. I just listened to a representative from Kansas that made a speech and said he thought that the basic problem that we had in our country today are the Christians. If we could just get rid of the Christians, then we'd be a lot better off as far as the world is concerned. A professor that I heard the other day that was on, I don't know if it was YouTube or what it was on, but she made the statement she didn't know why we needed families anymore. They're not important. And the other professor that is teaching his reality is the fact that children don't belong to families. They belong to society. Okay? They're trying to destroy the very fabric of our nation, of life on earth, and the family. So when we come to holidays like Father's Day and Mother's Day and Grandparents' Day and all those others, I think that even though we may just slight them off, that there are things that are representing certain values that we hold very dear, that are biblical values. So it's important for us as we look at the widow of Zarephath here that we would see some principles, some characteristics of her in life that we can look at and not only think about our mothers, but also the mothers of today. Do I hold some of these same principles, same thoughts that we see in this text? If you would, read with me in 1 Kings chapter 17, beginning in verse 7. Sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, being Elijah, "Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and for your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." So she went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Do you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" "Give me your son," Elijah replied. He took him from her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy also upon this widow I'm staying with by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room to the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." Here's the experience that she is having, and the first thing that I want to share with you that we apply to our life today is the struggle of a mom. You explain to me, who is this lady and what's going on with her? What's her name? We don't know. Okay. Not important. Not important. But what kind of life does she have? What is she going through in life? Pardon me? Extremely poor. One thing that we do know that's happened to this lady is what? Louder? Okay, her husband's died. Okay? And the fact that her and her son are by themselves is a good indication she has no other family. Because family would have taken her in to help her. In this case, we don't know her age, we don't know her name, we don't know her son's name, we don't know his age either. But when Elijah comes upon her, what is she doing? Okay, she's picking up some sticks to do what? Last meal. Okay, there's no more food left. This is all there is. So we're going to have this one last meal, and then we're going to die. She's a single mom, trying to make it. And it looks like she's not going to. And she is out. She has given up hope. She does not see any remedy to the situation at all. And thinks that maybe she doesn't have a whole lot to give. All she's got left to give to her son is what? This little meal, a piece of bread or whatever it might be. And she realizes that she is very, very alone. Extreme poverty. A lot of stress. Kind of sounds like our society, doesn't it? A couple of the stories that I told the young people downstairs. One is that according to the United Nations, and you can do whatever you want with their statistics, how much does the average family in the world make in a year? Anybody want to guess? $400 a year for the average family in the world. Okay? $400. We have a hard time making a week on $400. One of the things that we fail to understand is that as we grew up, I don't remember once worrying about whether mom was going to have food on the table when we got home. I don't remember worrying about having clothes to wear. I was next to the youngest of 8 children, next to the third son, the fourth son, and there was a lot of hand-me-downs. But there was going to be food there. There was going to be clothes there. There was shelters there. Here's a lady that is struggling so much, just trying to make a living, trying to raise her son. And it doesn't look like she's going to make it. Ken's going to be here in a few weeks for camp. And I remember a conversation we had that he does a Team Mission USA. I don't know if you're aware. He does a lot of short-term mission trips. And one they did to Barbados, was the very, very poorest part of Barbados. And they were doing a VBS. And one morning of that VBS, there was this little girl that came, and he said the cutest little girl he'd ever seen. And his daughter, Kim, said to that little girl, "You're so cute, I could take you home." The next morning, this little girl comes back to VBS with her mom, with all her luggage. And mom says, "You said you'd take her home." And as we were having this conversation, one of the people in the group said, "Well, what kind of mother would give her daughter up like that?" And Ken very quickly said, "A mother that knew this was the only chance her daughter had to get out of the life that she was in." And they went back to the house, you want to call it, the hut. Just barely enough, there was her mom, dad, brother, and her 4 people in this little hut that probably about as big as the area of this piano. They had a stove at least. It was a coffee can that sat on a bunch of sticks, and that was all they cooked with. And this mother was showing an extraordinary amount of love that in the midst of her struggle, she wanted what? The best for her child. The best that could be there for her. That's what this mother wants here. Imagine what this lady has gone through. She's lost her husband. How long ago? We don't know. But she's lost her husband, and now her and her son at the point of the end of their life. There is no tomorrow now. We're just going to eat what food's left over, and that's it. That's going to be the end of the life that we had. But imagine what she's going to go through. As we read the text, what else is going to happen in the near future after Elijah comes to stay with her? You remember? Her son dies. Wow. My goodness. So we see the struggle that this lady is having. And ladies, if you have children, can you imagine how would you feel if you were in that spot where that lady's at? You want to take care of your child, but you don't have the means to. You don't know how to continue to do that. So the response that has to be in the heart of this lady is the sorrow that she has. Okay? Moms experience a very unique sorrow. Something that we may not understand. I can remember the other story I told the young people was when my mom was pregnant with Dave, my brother Dave. He's 9 years younger than I. That makes him 21. Well, Mom worked as a waitress, and she was on her feet a lot, and she contracted varicose veins. Very serious, to the point that during the 9 months she was pregnant with Dave, that she had to lay in bed. She wasn't allowed to get up for anything. The only thing that she got up for was doctor's appointments. And she was about 8 months pregnant, and she went to the doctor, and the only time that I ever saw my mom cry was she came back from the doctor's appointment. So I went to her and I said, "Mom, what's wrong?" Now, Mom was 41 years old, her 8th child, had to lay in bed for the 9 months she was pregnant with David. And in tears she said, "Joe, the doctor told me I can't have any more children." Only time I ever saw her cry. Because she understood that that was a key part of her life, was her children. Her children. And worked very hard to do that. The sorrow that she had. But ladies, as your children grew up, how many other sorrows did you experience? All kinds of things that we've talked about. Anybody want to share, moms, a particular type of sorrow? You don't have to give me an incident, but a particular type of sorrow that you experienced. I can see your eyes. You've all got them. Andrew's not talking. Okay. How about the first boyfriend or girlfriend that your child breaks up with? Didn't make the team this year. Didn't do those types of things that we all experience that just kind of go by the wayside. You know, I don't know how many sorrows that my mom went through that we weren't even aware of, that she never shared with us what she's going through. And all of you have experienced that also, have you not, moms? Those things that are just heartbreaking, and the sorrow that you experience just because you're a mom. How would you feel if your child was hungry and you can't give him anything to eat? There is nothing there. The son gets ill and he dies. Can there be anything worse than that? Moms, could there be anything worse than that? And the answer is no. No. You know, if you go through the grief counseling and things like that, they will tell you on generally that if you have a parent die, the time of actual grief is 3 to 4 years. If it's a spouse that dies, it's 6 or 7 years. If it's a child that dies, it never ends. It never ends. That grief continues on all the way through. Can you imagine the sorrow that she is feeling there? How would you describe the bond between a mother and her child? See, it's something so unique that nobody outside of a mom can actually understand that. There was a true story of years ago that there was a mother that was in the south of Wales. She had her little baby, not very old at all, was carrying the baby across the country to get somewhere else, and a blizzard hit unexpectedly. And it grew cold and a lot of snow and a wind, and she knew that they were going to freeze to death. And what she did before she finally gave up was that she took all her outer clothing off and wrapped it around her child, laid her child on the ground, wrapped and laid on top of her child. And after the blizzard was over, they found her in this mound of snow. And when they took her up, they found the baby still alive. And they rushed the baby to the hospital, and the child lived. And he became David Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Great Britain, one of the greatest statesmen in the history of the English Empire. How do you describe the bond? I mean, I can tell you story after story about mothers that the bond with a child is so great, what the mothers were willing and able to go through because of that. So here she is, she's picking up the sticks to have this last meal, and then Elijah shows up, and the first thing he's asked is, could you give me a drink of water? Well, she probably can manage that. But then what did he ask her? Bread. Now, okay, moms, here's your chance to respond honestly. You've got one last meal for your son. The last food you had for him. And this stranger walks up to you and says, feed me first. What are you going to do?
Feed my child.
Interesting, isn't it? In all honesty, moms, what would you do first? Feed a child. Okay? But in the midst of this, for some reason, we see this hint of faith that this lady has. Because what does she do? She goes and she makes this bread and gives it to Elijah. And if I know moms, like I think I know moms, probably the part that she was going to eat is the part that Elijah got. And she makes this bread for him, and we see this sacrifice that this mom is going to make. Here again, we have no idea in early years as we're growing up how much sacrifice our moms made. We have no idea of all these things. You know, it's like the story that the teacher is saying, now, your mom, and she has 5 kids, and there's a pie left, and she wants to give each one of you a piece of pie, and herself. How many pieces will she cut the pie into? And one little boy said, 5. And the teacher said, well, you don't know your math. It'd be 6. And he said, you don't know my mom. She wouldn't be hungry anymore. And we would get all the pie. That's That's what we see as we identify with mothers. That's the type of moms that I grew up with. I don't know how yours was, but that was always the case, and how many times I regret that I never really understood, comprehended what Mom was doing there. I didn't understand all the sacrifices being made in that, and how grateful we are for those moms that did that. So it's a time where the rubber meets the road, isn't it, for this lady? What is she supposed to do? She ends up, and at the worst time, at the very worst time, she opens her home up to this man of God, to Elijah. She doesn't know him for sure, who he is, but she decides that she will do that. Her faith caused her and her son to continue to live. By her willingness to trust God, that the oil never ran out, the flour never ran out, all the time that this drought was still on the land, and she was able to take care of her son and herself because she trusted God when it came right down to it. There was a family named Rosenberg that were involved in the Holocaust. Samuel Rosenberg was his name, and he had a family with several children. They all were arrested by the Nazis and put in concentration camps. The rule of the concentration camp was, as long as you can do the work, you live. When you're physically unable to do the work, you're going to die. Well, he was very concerned because he had a son named David that was very frail, knew that he was not going to be able to withstand the work. So they would take Solomon and the men, and they would go out and work, and they would take the women and children and make them work and doing different things. And every night he would look to make sure that he could see all his family there, that everybody was okay. But one night when he came back, his wife and David were gone. And he asked another son who was in a corner weeping and crying, and said, "What's happened? What's happened?" He said, "David wasn't able to work today, so they came to get him, to execute him." And he was so afraid, Dad, that Mom finally said to him, "There's nothing to be afraid of." But he was still trembling, so Mom took his hand and went with him. That is the love of the mother, the sacrifice the mother is willing to give for the sake of her child. But the story doesn't end there, because the final point here is the salvation of a mom. She started out not being a woman of faith, but ends up being a woman of faith. And we see this little glint of that in verse 12, that there is some faith there. She did what God wanted her to do. And her faith caused her to open her home up to Elijah, and she put at great risk, believing the promise that Elijah had given to her. But she took that step. The step that made no sense. The step that defies all logic. Why would you feed this stranger before you've fed your own son based upon his promise? And the same thing is true of us, that we understand that promise of God. That God was going to provide for her, and nothing ever dried up. She had all this food that she had. And it is not easy to give by faith. Remember in Mark 12, I think it was, the widow's mite? These guys, if I can put it on modern terms today, these men were going up to the coffers at the temple and throwing in their checks for $100 and $500, and this lady comes up and puts what in the treasury? Mite. Worth about half a cent. Okay? And what is the strange thing that Jesus says to his disciples? She's given more. Okay? She's given more. Well, how do you figure that? These guys are giving $100, $200, and she gives a penny, because he said she gave of what she had, not what was left over. That she gave by faith, not knowing. She gave her lunch money, not knowing, but believing that God was going to provide. There is a verse in Philippians 4 where Paul is in prison, and he's talking about the Philippian church, by the way, which was the poorest church that he founded, that supported him financially more than any other church did. And they gave him some money to help him through a man named Epaphroditus, and as he writes, he says that he has learned to be content. And then in verse 19, you know what Paul writes? "For my God is able to supply all your needs through his riches and glory in Christ Jesus." That she gave by faith. He didn't have an extra loaf of bread over here, so I can give Elijah a piece of bread because I got a whole loaf over here. This was it. This was the last food she had, but she trusted God to deliver her, and he did. And then her son dies, and then she has this glitch in faith. No mom, dad, or anybody else has perfect faith. What did you do this for? Okay. And Elijah restores the life to her son, and notice in verse 24, we see where her faith really is. What does she say to Elijah? Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is true. See the faith that has come to her, even greater now than ever was before. She listened to God's prophet. She listened to God's word and knew it was the truth. That she trusted it, and because of that, now she is able to have a greater faith. She knows that it is the truth. And she leans upon God totally. You cannot exist that way. You cannot live like that based on second-hand faith. Well, my mom and dad believe, so that's good enough for me. I've had men say to me, well, my wife goes to church and she covers it all for both of us. I'm not going to be saved by a second-hand faith. Here, this widow of Zarephath, who, by the way, is not a Jewish person, she's not a church lady at all, shows this great faith in what God has done, that her faith and her patience is tested, and she proves to be that. And in spite of her circumstances, she believes that God will provide. And God answered her prayers. Her son lives. Boy, talk about a Mother's Day present, huh? Talk about something that had to be very special for her. So her son is allowed to live. And here we see the example of saving faith, that God worked in the life of this widow. And one of the greatest honors that could ever be bestowed upon this widow is the fact that in Luke chapter 4, Jesus refers to her in the faith. He's in Nazareth, his hometown. He preaches to them. They don't like the sermon at all because he says to them, I'm the Messiah. I am the Son of God. And then he gives two examples. The other one is Naaman, who was a ruler in Syria, and the widow of Zarephath, who because of their faith, God worked in their lives in a very great way. And the reaction was the fact that then the Jews decided they were going to throw Jesus off of a ledge and kill him. Because both Naaman and the widow of Zarephath were Gentiles. They weren't church people. They were not part of this chosen group that the Jews thought they were. And it's amazing to me, and I see it on a regular basis, folks, in all honesty, that there are times that I come across people that have no church connection that seem to have a greater faith than a lot of people do in the church. That they have this faith and this trust in God, and I'm sitting there thinking, where did that come from? How do they possess this type of faith when they don't attend church anywhere? They don't be involved in a certain church or whatever. Jesus is using this pagan single mom to prove a point about God is after mothers that have faith, that trust in Him, that believe in Him. And eventually, how many of you ever had a parent teach you how to learn to ride a bicycle? Okay. Did they have bicycles back then, Joe? Really? Really? Like in the circus type? Now, I will tell you, I used a concrete post to get started. And stand on that post, jump on the bike and go. Because there was 8 of us kids, and the only bike we had was the old 26-inch coaster. And I'm 8 years old. And I used a bush to stop with, because you'd always run the bicycle into the bush to stop you. Russ is going through that, he knows. Okay? But with parents, they get their child out there. Madison's going through this right now with their training wheels and all that. But the parents get out there and they're holding on to your arm to help you balance as you go. And gradually what happens, you let go and they take off riding the bike. That's what faith is. That we need help, we need support in learning how to believe, and eventually, though, that our faith is strong enough that we continue on. This single mom's faith is a lesson for us all, for all of us. That her faith, though not perfect, is what God desires of moms. Well, we could go in a lot of directions there. I know it's tough to be a parent in the world in which we live today. I know it's tough to be a grandparent in the world in which we live today. Thinking of the direction our world is going, the concerns that I have, for me, I really have no concern for my own life in the direction, but for my children, for my grandchildren, just wonder, what's it going to be like? What is our country going to be? And I impress upon my sons the fact that one of the things that we need to do more than anything else is we need to teach these children about God. We need to teach them about Jesus. We need to look and know that we need to establish something strong in their faith, because it's not going to be a popular thing to be a Christian, and it's becoming less and less popular in the world that we live, but it's still the truth. And that if I trust in God, He's going to see me through anything. And moms, He does the same for you, as much as a struggle as it is. I think that, and no offense to anybody, but I believe that the last statistic I read, that in our country this year, 47% of all babies are going to be born to single moms. And they're going to have to be mom and dads both. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And that's another sermon for another time, if the Lord's church is going to reach out to help those that are struggling in those kinds of situations, that they will learn about Jesus that we believe in. Faith-filled mothers hear from God. They are servants of God, and they are blessed by God. G. Campbell Morgan was a great preacher years ago, and he was asked, he had four sons, and they all became preachers. So one of his youngest sons was being discussed with a newspaper reporter, and said, of your family, who's the greatest preacher? And he quickly answered, my mother. With the instruction that she gave me, the help, the support that she showed me, she was by far the greatest preacher in our family. Our hymn of invitation and dedication this morning is hymn number 394, Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And I think it's quite interesting. Yesterday I did a memorial service for a lady that I've known for many, many years, Faye Elliott, and had the opportunity to get to know her family and to share with them. And of all interesting things, this song was the last song that was played in this funeral service. Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And I would like not only to offer it as invitation, dedication, but moms, maybe a prayer that we can share with God just now. That our desire as moms and grandmas and great-grandmas is that we would just draw closer and closer to Him. That He would cause us to be the people to be able to share His word and His way and His will with those around us. Let's stand together. We're going to sing the first and third verses of 394.